The filing fee was 18 credits. I keep coming back to that number. Out of everything on those 47 pages, the colony demands, the mineral assessments, the projected timelines, the whole polite architecture of a civilization telling you to sit down and be quiet. The thing that kept pulling my eye was line item 9, subsection C, administrative processing fee, 18 standard collective credits. They had calculated the cost of 4 colonies. They had rounded human casualties to the nearest billion in a footnote. They had given us 72 hours to comply or face what the document called corrective engagement. And then they had charged us 18 credits for the paperwork. I had been awake for 31 hours by the time that document landed in my personal relay. It came through official channels, properly encrypted, bearing the 17-seal stamp of the Interstellar Collective. It looked like a trade dispute notice. It smelled like bad coffee because everything in my kitchen smells like bad coffee at 5 in the morning. I read it 4 times before I believed it. The 5th time, I stopped disbelieving and started counting. The collective had been watching humanity for about 40 years, give or take. They had done what older civilizations always do with younger ones, extended membership, offered seats at the right tables, created frameworks that looked like partnership and functioned like a leash. We attended their summits. We filed our reports. We paid our trade assessments on time, every cycle, no exceptions. We were the galaxy's good students, and for 40 years, the galaxy had patted us on the head and told us we were coming along nicely. The demand notice changed the tone of that relationship considerably. I am not a diplomat. I spent 28 years in the United Earth Defense Forces, retired at the rank of commander, and now I grow tomatoes in Dayton, Ohio, most of which die of blight before I can pick them. I got this document because 22 years ago, before the retirement and the tomatoes, I was at Titan Station when the Kelorian fleet made its first unannounced visit. I was one of 14 people who walked away from that visit. The other people did not walk away in any sense of the phrase. I do not talk about Titan. I mention it only because it explains why, when I read that document at my kitchen table at 5 in the morning, the filing fee was not the thing that made me set down my coffee. Appendix D was the thing that made me set down my coffee. Appendix D was a single page, clean formatting, standard collective administrative font, the kind of document that gets generated when someone runs a population projection model and exports the results. It listed, in 3 columns, the projected outcomes of human noncompliance. The first column was timeline. The second column was infrastructure loss. The third column was population impact. They had labeled it an appendix, like it was supplementary material, like it was additional reading you might get to if you had the time. The numbers in column 3 were not small. I sat there for a while. The coffee went cold. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the early dark. I listened to the dog and looked at Appendix D and thought about the filing fee, because that was easier to think about than the numbers. 18 credits for this. I picked up my phone. I dialed one number. It rang twice. The man who answered did not say hello. He said, "I saw it." That was Cal Briggs, senator from Oregon, and the only person in the Earth legislature who had also been at Titan Station. He had been a junior attaché then, 22 years ago, and he had come out of it with a limp in his left leg and a very specific understanding of what the collective considered acceptable losses. "When is the session?" I said. 6 hours, he said. "Are they going to do what I think they are going to do?" There was a pause on his end, not uncertainty, more like a man choosing how many words to use. "Yes," he said. I hung up. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. I made fresh coffee. I sat back down at the kitchen table and read the document a 6th time, not because there was anything new in it, but because I wanted to be very clear in my own mind about what had been said to us. I wanted to have it precisely right. I wanted to know the exact weight of the thing before I watched what happened next. The sun came up over Dayton. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Birds, traffic. The neighbor's dog had stopped barking. Somewhere above the clouds, A 72-hour clock was running. I finished my coffee. The collective had filed their paperwork. They had paid their 18 credits. They had done the math on 4 colonies and several billion lives and put the results in a clean appendix. They had done this because, in their estimation, humanity was a manageable problem. A young species, still impressed by the architecture of galactic power. We had been good students for 40 years. They expected us to remain good students. They were working from incomplete data. I refilled my mug, looked at the document one more time, specifically at Appendix D, specifically at the column numbers. I thought about the filing's fee. 18 credits. Bless their hearts. The emergency session of the Unified Earth Council began at 11 in the morning. Broadcast on every relay frequency, the collective monitored, which was all of them. Ambassador Lynn Carter walked into the chamber in a grey suit that cost less than the filing fee. She sat at the center of the long curved table where Earth's senior diplomatic delegation had been sitting for 22 years. Behind her, arrayed in the gallery and on 17 different relay screens, were the assembled representatives of the Interstellar Collective, 6 of them present in person, the rest projecting from various corners of the galaxy, all watching. I watched from my kitchen. The broadcast was on the counter screen, the volume low enough that I could hear the coffee percolating. On every other channel, the same images: Earth Council chamber, grey suit, 17 alien faces. The collective's senior envoy was a Thurvian named something I cannot pronounce, so I will call him the envoy. He was tall, pale blue, with the kind of ancient patience on his face that comes from representing a civilization 8,000 years older than ours. He had done this before. 4 other species had sat in rooms like this one and received notices like the one currently sitting on Lynn Carter's desk. All 4 had complied. He was not anxious. That was, looking back, his first mistake. The session opened with the standard protocols, readings of the formal demand, acknowledgement of timeline, invitation for Earth's response. Lynn Carter listened to all of it with her hands folded on the desk, not taking notes, not moving. Her staff behind her was equally still. The whole Earth delegation was still. On the relay screens showing social media feeds, something unusual was already happening. Earth had gone quiet. Not silent, not panicked, just quiet. The usual noise of 40 billion people broadcasting their daily lives had dropped by a measurable volume, not because anyone had told them to. Nobody had issued a statement. No government communication had asked for calm. The human species had collectively, without coordination, without discussion, gone to a lower register. The way a forest goes quiet when something large moves through it, not because the trees decided to be quiet. Because there are things that move through the world that the nervous system recognizes before the brain does. I noticed it first on the feeds from Southeast Asia, then North America, then Europe. The volume of human noise across every platform the collective monitored dropped. Social media slowed, broadcasts shortened. The usual argument and celebration and chatter of a species that never stops talking had pulled itself inward, like a hand closing. The collective's xenopsychology team would later file a report on this phenomenon. They called it prey pattern withdrawal behavior in the initial draft. They had to revise that classification later, several times. I was watching the Kellorian translator. She was stationed to the left of the envoy, responsible for rendering his formal remarks into Earth standard. She was young for a Kellorian, maybe 40 years old, which in their terms is approximately adolescent. She had the long secondary set of eyes characteristic of her species, all 4 of them half-lidded in the expression that I had learned 22 years ago on Titan meant something between confidence and boredom. She had the same expression now. I kept watching her face. The envoy finished his opening remarks. The collective's formal position was reiterated: 40% mineral infrastructure, 3 outer colonies. Cessation of military development programs, compliance within 66 remaining hours. The terms had not changed. They were not going to change. This was not, the envoy's tone made clear, a negotiation. It was a notification of accepted terms. Lynn Carter nodded once. Then she stood up. The chamber went quiet in a different way, the specific quiet of a room that has been expecting a long speech and is suddenly not sure it is getting one. She looked at the relay screens, all 17 of them. She did not look at her notes because she had no notes. She said, "We have heard you. Here is our counteroffer." Then she sat back down. No document followed, no terms, no list of conditions. 7 words, delivered in the flat tone of someone reading a grocery list, and then Lynn Carter folded her hands back on the desk and waited. The envoy's face did something I had never seen a Thurvian face do. I did not have a name for what it did. His translator looked at Lynn Carter, and for the first time, her expression was not bored. On the gallery feeds, the collective representatives were exchanging communication on their private channels. I know this because the relay showed their faces, and their faces were suddenly doing a great deal. The ancient patience of the Thurvian envoy had developed a small crack in it, right in the center, like a windshield an instant after the rock hits. I turned the volume down on my kitchen screen. I had heard what I needed to hear. 7 words, no document, no terms, not here are our terms or here is our position, here is our counteroffer. The grammar of it was the point. You offer something, an offer implies an exchange. It implies that what comes next will not be to the other party's preference. It also implies that you have something to offer. The collective had spent 22 years building a picture of humanity. Regular reports, trade assessments, military capability surveys, all neatly submitted on schedule. They had a very thorough file on what Earth could and could not do. They had run the models. They had done the math. The math said humanity was a manageable species with a moderate defensive capability, rising slowly on a predictable development curve. The math was built on what we had chosen to show them. Here is a thing I learned in 28 years of military service. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation is not when the other side shows aggression. Aggression you can read. You can calculate aggression. The most dangerous moment is when the other side stops being what you thought they were and you have no model for what they are instead. The collective's xenopsychology team had called it prey pattern behavior. They had 48 hours to revise that assessment. Lynn Carter sat at her desk with her hands folded and did not speak again. The chamber filled with the sound of 17 civilizations making rapid calculations that were not coming out the way they expected. Outside my kitchen window, Dayton was going about its Tuesday. Cal Briggs sent me a message at noon. 3 words, clock is running. I sent back 1 word, I know. I looked at the relay screen for a while longer. The envoy had recovered his composure. He was saying something formal and measured about the importance of clear communication and the value of precise terms. His translator was doing her job. Her face was doing its job too, back to the half-lidded default, the bored competence. But her fourth eye, the one Kellorians use for close threat assessment, was open. Just that one. I finished my coffee. The 72 hours ran out on a Thursday morning. Not dramatically, the clock did not strike, no alarm went off. The deadline passed the way deadlines always pass when you have already decided what comes next, quietly, like a door locking from the inside. I heard about the first activation from Cal, not through official channels. He called me from what sounded like a car, engine running, road noise in the background. They are lighting up Sector 9, he said. I put down my coffee, all of it. Everything on the list. I sat with that for a second. How long have you known? Since Titan, he said. He hung up. Here is the part the collective did not know. The part nobody outside a very small room of very patient people knew. For 40 years, while the trade assessments got filed and the summits got attended, and the compliance reports got submitted on schedule without exception. The collective believed humanity's military capacity was moderate and rising slowly on a predictable development curve. They believed this because we had shown them exactly enough to make the model work. Development reports, equipment inventories, base registers, all accurate, all complete, all describing a humanity that was, in military terms, manageable. They did not know about Project Millstone. Nobody talked about Project Millstone. There was no press coverage, no public record, no budget line that said Project Millstone in the way a budget line says what it means. It existed inside 17 other budget items spread across 4 different government departments, paid for through redesignated infrastructure credits over the course of 4 decades, operated in the outer asteroid belt under registry names that all meant something else. It was the most expensive infrastructure project in human history, and to the collective's accounting systems, it looked like a series of unremarkable mining operations. To anyone standing outside Sector 9 at 6:15 on that Thursday morning, it looked like something else entirely. Dr. Owen Webb was the first person outside the classified program to see the full picture. He was not a military man. He was a systems analyst from Edinburgh who had worked for the collective's own trade verification division for 11 years, which was exactly why he had been recruited. He understood their sensors better than their own engineers did, because he had spent a decade teaching the sensors to see what humanity wanted them to see. I had met Webb twice. He was the kind of man who made you feel like you were slightly behind in a conversation he had been having with himself for years. Short, sharp-faced, with the specific energy of someone who is never fully in the room with you because part of him is always running a model. He had been the architect of the screen, the layered, decade-long exercise in making 40 years of asteroid belt construction look like routine resource extraction. When I asked him once, at a classified briefing in Brussels, how he had felt about the work, he had said, "It is the easiest kind of misdirection. You show people what they expect and charge them a filing fee for the privilege." I had not laughed at the time. I was laughing now. The activation sequence for Project Millstone ran for 6 hours. I watched what I could watch from unclassified feeds, which was not much. Mostly I watched the collective's diplomatic channels. They were still broadcasting. The Envoy had issued 2 additional statements since the session, both in the formal register of a civilization that has decided it is being tested and is waiting for the test to end. At hour 3, the broadcast from the collective's senior station went quiet for 40 seconds. At hour 4, it went quiet for 4 minutes. At hour 5, it went quiet for 11 minutes and came back with a noticeably different tone. Still formal, still measured, but the ancient patience was gone from it. In its place was something I had only heard once before at the very beginning of the Titan incident, a specific frequency in the translation channel that their engineers use when the situation no longer matches any of the pre-authorized response templates. They were improvising. Captain Nora Vale was the officer who sent the first official transmission from Sector 9. She was 43 years old, from a small town in New Zealand called Leven, and she had been commanding classified operations in the outer belt for 6 of those years. I had served with her briefly in 2041, before my retirement. She had a way of speaking that reminded me of someone reading a shopping list, flat, precise, completely unbothered by the content of what she was describing. Her transmission to Earth Command was 5 seconds long. "Millstone is live, all units nominal, awaiting orders." That was it, 5 seconds. 40 years of human patience made operational in 5 seconds. The collective's sensor network picked up the fleet at approximately 6:45 that morning. Not a fleet in the way anyone had been modeling. The models had numbers for Earth's declared military assets. They had projected growth curves and capability assessments and all the careful arithmetic of a civilization deciding what a manageable threat looks like. The fleet that appeared on their sensors at 6:45 did not fit the model. It fit no model they had. The silence from the collective's command channels was immediate. Not panicked silence, not the static of a communication failure, the specific silence of a room full of people who have just been handed a number that cannot be right and are checking their equipment to make sure the equipment is working correctly. The equipment was working correctly. I was sitting at my kitchen table when the 17th simultaneous channel silence hit. I know it was simultaneous because I had the relay feeds open on my screen, all 17 collective diplomatic frequencies on separate windows, and they all went dark within the same 3-second window. I watched each one go. I had a sandwich. I put the sandwich down after the 7th channel dropped. I did not pick it up again. The silence lasted 4 minutes across all 17 channels. 4 minutes of a galaxy recalculating. 4 minutes of 17 ancient civilizations staring at data that did not match their files on humanity. When the channels came back, the formal tones were gone. The envoy's voice, coming through on Earth's primary diplomatic relay, had aged about 1,000 years in 4 minutes. He was still speaking in the correct register. He was still using the approved diplomatic vocabulary, but the words had a sound underneath them that the vocabulary was not designed to carry. Lynn Carter was already back at her desk in the council chamber. She had been there for the full 6 hours of activation. She had not issued a statement. She had not made a speech. She had sat at her desk, hands folded, and waited. When the envoy's transmission came through, she listened to it in full. 22 minutes of formal language about dialogue and proportionality and the importance of clear communication. Then she sent back a one-line response. I do not know exactly what it said. The official record was classified for 7 years. What I was told, secondhand, by Cal Briggs, who was in the chamber when it was drafted, was that it was shorter than the demand notice, considerably shorter. It included no filing fee. Outside my window, the neighbor's dog was barking again. I looked at the sandwich on the table. I looked at the 17 dark and then relit diplomatic feeds. I thought about 40 years, about all the summits, all the compliance reports, all the filing fees paid on time, in full, without complaint, while the asteroid belt quietly became something new. I picked up the sandwich. Well, all right then, I said to nobody in particular. The clock above my kitchen door read 7:12 in the morning. The galaxy's model of humanity was 40 years out of date. It was about to be updated. The actual engagement lasted 11 hours. I did not watch it from any official briefing room. I had not been on active duty for 8 years, and no one had called me in from my tomatoes to sit in a command center. I watched it the way most of humanity watched it, from a screen in a public place, surrounded by strangers, with a drink I kept not finishing because my hands kept forgetting what they were holding. There is a bar 3 blocks from my house called Fielding's. It has been there since before I was born. The kind of place that feels the same at 8 in the morning as it does at midnight, same wood, same low light, same smell of something that has been there a long time and is not planning to leave. I walked there after the diplomatic channels went back up. I did not want to watch what was coming from my kitchen table alone. The bartender's name was Pete, 24 years old, gap between his front teeth, with the very specific calm of someone who has been behind a bar long enough that nothing surprises him anymore. He set a mug in front of me when I came in, which told me I was a regular, and I suppose I was. I told him something was happening and it was going to be on the relay. He turned on every screen in the place. At 8:43 that morning, Admiral Grace Young authorized the commencement of what the official record would later call Operation Millstone Response. In the history books, when those get written, they will probably call it something else, something with weight to it, something that sounds like a turning point. I will tell you what it actually looked like from a bar stool in Dayton. It looked like a lot of blinking lights going out. Grace Young was 61 years old. She had been commanding classified operations for 17 years and before that had spent a decade as a tactical instructor at the Defense Academy in Colorado. I had served under her for 2 years in the late 20s, early in my career, when she was still a captain and I was young enough to think rank was about age. She was not a person who wasted words. She was not a person who made gestures. She had a face that seemed specifically designed to give nothing away, not because she had learned to hide things, but because very little appeared to require expression from her. Her one broadcast to the collective that morning was 11 seconds long. I cannot reproduce the exact language. What I can tell you is that it was in Earth Standard offered no translation, and ended with the phrase, "You have a good one." The same thing she had said at the end of every briefing, every operation report, every routine transmission, going back 20 years. I know because the people who had served under her all said the same thing when the clips circulated later. "That is just how she signs off," they said. That was the most unsettling part, I think, not the capability, not the numbers, the fact that it was routine to her. The first collective relay station to go dark was in the Thurvian outer network, at a point 6 light-years from Earth's inner colonies. Then the next one, then the next. The screens in Fielding's bar were showing the relay maps, the galaxy's communication infrastructure rendered in green and blue dots, and the dots, one by one, going dark. Not the whole galaxy, not indiscriminately, every installation within 6 light-years, every military base, every forward station, every relay point that had a dual civilian-military function. Gone, systematically, in an order that the collective's own strategists would later recognize as following their own strategic infrastructure map, the classified version they had never shared with Earth. We had a copy. Young Pete behind the bar was watching with his arms folded, the way a man watches something he does not have a framework for yet. 2 other customers had come in, an older woman in a postal service uniform, a man in a construction jacket who had not taken it off. They were all watching the dots go out. Nobody said anything for a while. At hour 3, the collective attempted to respond. Not an engagement, they were not positioned for that, which was exactly the point. They attempted to respond administratively. A formal declaration of hostilities, a demand for cessation, a reissued version of the original notice with the timelines adjusted. It came through the one remaining channel that was still open because we had left it open specifically for this purpose. Lynn Carter accepted the transmission, logged it, sent back a 3-word acknowledgement. Then the next relay station went dark. There is a thing that happens in a room when people realize that the situation has moved past the frameworks they had for it. I have seen it in military briefings. I have seen it at the end of competitions when the result is no longer within the range the analysts had modeled. I have seen it on faces when news arrives that is technically comprehensible but requires a fundamental adjustment to something the person had considered fixed. The bartender Pete had that thing on his face at about hour 5. He looked at me. I was the only one in the bar who did not look confused. "You knew," he said. "It was not a question." "Some of it," I said. "How long?" I thought about Titan Station, about the walk out of that facility with 13 other people, and the flight back, and the long quiet of understanding what we had survived, and why we had survived it, and what that meant about the nature of the thing that had let us. I thought about 22 years of paying filing fees and attending summits and filing compliance reports while the asteroid belt became something new. "A while," I said. He nodded. He refilled my mug without asking. The screens kept showing dots going dark. At hour 7, the collective's primary diplomatic channel sent a different kind of message. Not formal, not in the approved administrative register. It was shorter than anything they had sent before, and it used language that was not from any of the standard diplomatic templates, which was itself a form of information. Formal language is a structure you stand inside when you know the floor. When the floor moves, the structure goes with it. I will not reproduce what they said. What mattered was the tone of it. The ancient patience was gone. In its place was something I recognized from experience, not exactly fear. Fear is what you feel when the danger is clear and in front of you and can be assessed. This was the thing before fear, the specific sensation of a model breaking in real time, of trying to calculate from data points that do not fit the formula you have been using for 8,000 years. I had felt it once before. At Titan. Except at Titan, I had been on the wrong side of the calculation. At hour 9, the postal service woman left. She said something to Pete at the door, quiet, and Pete nodded. The construction jacket man had not moved. He was watching the screens with an expression that had started as confusion and was settling into something harder and quieter. The kind of expression that comes when you have run out of the energy required to be surprised and replaced it with a flat, steady attention. I recognized that expression too. At hour 11, the last target on Admiral Young's list went dark. The galaxy's communication map, within 6 light-years of Earth, showed all relay points offline. The systematic removal of the collective's ability to project power toward human space was complete in exactly 11 hours. My phone buzzed. The number was one I had not dialed in 22 years. The message was 2 words. "All right then." I stared at it for a while. That number belonged to a man named Warren Dale, who had been a field technician at Titan Station and was one of the 14 people who had walked out. He lived in Auckland now, last I knew. We had not spoken since a brief phone call after his daughter was born, maybe 15 years ago. We did not stay in touch in the way people stay in touch. We stayed in touch in the way people stay in touch, when the thing they share is too large for regular contact and too permanent to forget. 2 words. "All right then." I sent back the same 2 words and put the phone in my pocket. The screens in Fieldings were quiet now, not the silence of nothing happening, the silence of something having happened. Pete was leaning on the bar, looking at the map, all those dark dots. He said, not to anyone specifically, "What happens now?" I thought about it. "They recalculate," I said. "And then..." I picked up my mug. "They decide whether to try again or try something different. Which one do you think they will pick?" I thought about the envoy's face during the session. I thought about the translator's 4th eye open. I thought about 17 channels going dark while a galaxy rebuilt its understanding of what it had been wrong about. "Different," I said. I left some credits on the bar, more than the drink cost. I walked home in the afternoon light, Dayton exactly as it had been that morning, traffic, birds, the neighbor's dog, now asleep in the yard. Ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that looks like nothing from the outside. The kind of day that, from the inside, is the whole thing. I made more coffee. I did not look at the relay feeds again that day. There was nothing left to watch that I had not already anticipated. I sat at the kitchen table with the bad coffee and thought, for a long time, about nothing in particular. The filing fee was 18 credits. We had paid it. Now the account was settled. 3 weeks after the engagement, the collective sent new representatives. Not the envoy, he had been recalled, which in Thurvian diplomatic terms is approximately the same as being told to sit in another room for a decade and think about your decisions. The new delegation was larger and quieter and moved through every meeting with the careful energy of people who have revised their understanding of what they are walking into. They came to 3 sessions. We sent junior staff to the first 2. Not as an insult. We genuinely needed the first 2 sessions to happen and to produce nothing, because there are things you can only learn about a counterpart's intentions by watching how they behave when you are not paying full attention to them. You watch the junior staff. You watch what questions the other side asks. You watch what they do not ask. Cal Briggs told me about the second session over the phone. He had been there as a senior observer, sitting in the back. He said the collective delegation had spent most of the session asking questions about infrastructure, not military infrastructure. Power generation, food distribution, colony management, the machinery of a civilization that intends to continue existing in a specific location for a long time. "They are not coming back for round 2, Cal said. "No," I said. "They are trying to figure out how permanent we are." "Yes," I said. There was a pause, then he said, "How is the garden?" I told him the tomatoes were dying. He told me to try less water. I tried less water. The tomatoes continued to die. I have a talent for growing things that are technically alive but not thriving, which my daughter Claire told me once was an excellent metaphor for my leadership style. She is not wrong. She is 31 now, works in climate engineering in Brisbane, and calls me every Sunday with the specific patience of someone who has accepted that her father is going to be difficult and has made peace with it. She called me the Sunday after the engagement. I was in the garden. She said, "Are you watching the feeds?" No, Dad. I know what happened. I do not need to watch people talk about what happened. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Were you scared?" I looked at the tomatoes. One of them had given up completely and was lying sideways in the soil, stem bent at an angle that communicated surrender. "No," I said. "You are a terrible liar," she said. She is the only person in the world who gets to say that to me. I let it stand. What I did not tell her was that I had not been scared in the way she meant, not the kind of scared that lives in your hands and your throat and makes time go strange. That kind of scared is for situations where the outcome is genuinely unknown. I had known too much for that kind of scared. What I had been was something quieter. A low, steady thing, closer to grief than fear. The specific feeling of watching a decision get made that cannot be unmade, and knowing that the world that exists after the decision will be different in ways that will take years to fully understand. You cannot be pure about a thing like that. You can be certain of it, you can know it was necessary, you cannot be pure about it. The galaxy went quiet in the weeks after. Not all at once, not immediately, but the communication volume on Earth-facing diplomatic channels dropped and kept dropping, and the drop was not the silence of hostility, it was the silence of recalculation. 17 civilizations, all doing their own version of what the collective's delegation was doing in those empty sessions, asking what the infrastructure looked like, what the growth curves looked like, how permanent the situation was. 4 species sent formal non-aggression requests within the first month. I know this because Cal told me in a phone call where he kept stopping to check something on his other screen. The 4 species were small ones, not collective members, not historically hostile, just civilizations that had been doing their own quiet assessment of where humanity sat in the larger picture and had revised their assessment along with everyone else. Earth processed each request, took its time, responded formally in complete diplomatic language with no filing fee attached. Owen Webb gave a public lecture at the University of Bristol about 6 weeks after the engagement. I read the transcript. He talked about his work in the outer belt with a kind of flat precision that must have been frustrating to people who wanted drama from it. He said the whole project had been, at its core, an exercise in reading the expectations of a counterpart and providing exactly what those expectations required, nothing more and nothing less, for as long as was necessary. Someone in the audience asked him if he felt proud. He said he felt tired. I understood that completely. Grace Young retired 4 months after the engagement, quietly, without ceremony. She gave a short statement to Earth Command that ran to about 2 paragraphs and ended with the usual sign-off. There was a dinner. I was not invited, which was correct, as I was not officially part of anything and had not been for 8 years. Cal sent me a photograph from the dinner. Young was at the center of a long table, surrounded by people who had worked with her for years. She looked the same as she always looked, undramatic, precise. Slightly impatient to be somewhere less attended. I put the photograph on my kitchen counter next to the relay screen. The collective's formal position on the engagement was issued about 3 months after. Lengthy, technical, written in the administrative language of a civilization that processes difficulty through documentation. It acknowledged the resolution of the previous dispute and proposed a revised framework for ongoing mutual coordination. It did not use the word apology. Thurvian diplomatic vocabulary does not contain an equivalent word, which is either a structural limitation or a philosophical position, and I have spent time thinking about which. It did not include a filing fee. The young diplomat arrived on a Tuesday in late autumn. She was not from the collective. She was from a species called the Veth, which is as close as I can come to the sound of it in English. Small species, 300 million individuals, one home world, no outer colonies, a cultural history going back about 4,000 years, much younger than the Thurvians, much older than us. They had been observers in the collective for about 600 years, which meant they had been watching everything from inside the room without ever sitting at the table. Her name sounded like Sira when I pronounced it in Earth Standard, and she told me to use that because she was aware that the correct pronunciation required a mouth shaped differently from mine. She came to my house, not to the council chamber, not to a diplomatic facility. She had filed a request through official channels for an informal meeting with me specifically. She had listed my name, my former rank, my current address in Dayton, Ohio. The request had gone through Cal's office, and Cal had forwarded it to me with a message that said simply, "She says she read your file. I would take the meeting." I met her on the front porch. She was about the height of a 12-year-old human child, with translucent structures along the sides of her face that shifted in the light and seemed to serve the same function as expressions. They moved when she thought, settled when she was listening, brightened in moments I interpreted as interest. She had a small recording device, which she showed me before she turned it on. Good manners. I brought 2 mugs of coffee. She looked at hers with the careful attention of someone who has been briefed on human hospitality customs and is determined to execute them correctly. She took a very small sip. Her expression did not change, but the structures along her face did something complicated. "It is bad coffee," I told her. "I have never made good coffee." She processed that and then made a sound I took for something like a laugh. We sat for a while. The tomato plants were visible from the porch, mostly dead, one still attempting to produce something in the late-season cold. She looked at them. "Those are your agricultural efforts," she said. "Those are my failures," I said. "They used to be my agricultural efforts." She made the sound again. Then she looked at me directly, and the structures along her face settled into something still and clear. She said, "I want to understand what you are." It was a genuine question. She had a notebook, actual paper, which I found unexpectedly moving, and her writing instrument was already in her hand. She was not asking to provoke. She was not asking as a test. She was the most earnest being I had sat with in a long time, which was either the product of youth or culture or both. I thought about how to answer. I've had 8 years of retirement and a lot of bad coffee to think about what humanity is. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a sociologist. I'm a man from Dayton who grew up in a world where the galaxy had already arrived and had already told us what our place in it would be. I went into the military because I had come from a family where that was what you did. I went to Titan because I was ordered to. I walked out of Titan with 13 other people because that is how it went. What happened after was not my decision. I was a retired commander growing bad tomatoes when the filing fee arrived. What I knew, and what I had been part of a long time ago, was a different thing from the decision that got made in those 6 hours. But she had asked what we are, not what I did. I looked at the tomatoes for a while. Then I said, "We are the thing that got tired of being managed." She wrote it down. I watched her write. Her writing instrument was small and she held it carefully, the way you hold something that matters. She wrote the sentence and then looked at it and then wrote something else underneath, notes, additional context, and the structures along her face were doing something complex and concentrated. "That is a simple answer," she said. "Yes," I said. "Is it the whole answer?" I considered. The late autumn air was cold, and the tomato plants were losing the last of their fight, and somewhere down the street, the neighbor's dog had started barking again at something in the yard. "The whole answer," I said, "would take more coffee than I have." She looked at her mug, considered, took another very small sip, the structures along her face expressing something that I can only describe as determination. "Tell me what you can," she said. So I told her some of it. Not Titan, I never tell anyone about Titan, but I told her about 40 years, about what it costs to be quiet for 40 years, about the specific patience required from a species that had something to build and understood that the building required a kind of stillness that did not come naturally to us, that we had to choose it deliberately every single day for 4 decades. I told her about the filing fee. She laughed at that, a real one, not the small polite sound from before. Her structures lit up like something had been turned on inside them. 18 credits, she said. 18 credits, I said. For everything that came after. They paid for it, I said. We just responded. She was quiet for a moment, writing, thinking. Then she said, "Are you frightening as a species?" I looked at the tomatoes. "I do not know," I said. "I think we were frightened for a long time. What came out of that is something I do not have a clean word for." "In your language or in general?" "Both," I said. She wrote that down too. She stayed for another hour. We talked about smaller things, the colony structures, the trade framework, the practical mechanics of what mutual coordination looks like when the power arrangement has fundamentally shifted. She was thorough. She asked good questions. When she did not understand something, she said so directly, which is rarer than it should be. When she left, she stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked back at me. "I will write a full report," she said. "I know," I said. "It will circulate to most of the species in the collective." "I know." She hesitated. The structures along her face did something I had not seen before, a slow, even shift that felt like acknowledgement. Not gratitude, exactly, something more precise than gratitude. "I think we were afraid of the wrong thing," she said. I did not respond to that, not because I disagreed, because some things you let sit where they land. She walked to the transport at the end of the street. I watched her go. Then I went back to the tomatoes. There is one plant that has been refusing to die all season. It is not thriving. It is not producing anything useful. It is a pale, thin plant that lists slightly to the left and has been in the same state, not dead, not quite alive, for 6 weeks. I have watered it at different rates. I have adjusted the soil. I have moved it to 2 different spots in the garden. It continues to list slightly to the left and refuse to commit to either direction. I have a theory that it is waiting for something I cannot provide. I am familiar with the feeling. I sat on the steps after Sierra left and looked at the plant for a while. The neighbor's dog had gone back to sleep. The street was quiet. In the distance, the low sound of the city doing what it does, traffic and machinery, and the ordinary noise of people going about their lives on a planet that has, in the last 3 months, fundamentally changed its position in the architecture of things. Most of those people did not go about those 3 months differently from how they had gone about the previous months. They worked, they talked, they fed their dogs and argued with their neighbors and made plans for things they intended to do next year. The galaxy had recalibrated, the collective had gone quiet, 4 species had sent non-aggression requests. All of that had happened, and the ordinary Tuesday continued to be an ordinary Tuesday. That is, I think, the thing that the galaxy found most difficult to understand about us. Not the capability, not the patience, not the construction in the asteroid belt or the 11 hours or the fleet that should not have existed. Those things are impressive, but impressive things can be catalogued and assessed and eventually understood in terms of power and strategy and the mathematics of expansion. What cannot be as easily catalogued is a species that built something extraordinary and then went home to bad coffee and dying tomatoes and ordinary Tuesdays without any apparent need to be seen doing it. We did not hold a parade. We did not broadcast a declaration. We did not rename the engagement after something grand. The official record is thorough and classified and dry, like all official records. The unofficial record is people like Pete behind the bar, watching dots go dark on a screen, and people like Claire in Brisbane calling on Sunday, and people like Warren Dale in Auckland sending 2 words in the middle of the night. All right then. I thought about what Sierra had said at the bottom of the steps, that they had been afraid of the wrong thing. She was right. The wrong thing to be afraid of was the capability. Capability is finite. It can be measured, counted, matched eventually. Capability is the thing you put in the columns of Appendix D and make projections about. The thing she should have been afraid of, the thing the galaxy is still working out how to assess, is the patience. 40 years of choosing to be still, deliberately, against a nature that is not still, in service of something that might never have been necessary and had to be built anyway because we had learned, at Titan and a dozen places like Titan, what the cost of not building it would be. That is not a military capability. That is a quality of character. And I think it is the hardest thing for a civilization to look at directly, because it requires them to ask a question about themselves that most ancient civilizations have stopped asking. What are we willing to do quietly, without recognition, without certainty of outcome, for something we believe is worth protecting? The collective had the math, they had the projections, they had the compliance reports and the development curves and the filing fee system. What they did not have was any data on what we were willing to do in the dark. I do not know what the galaxy thinks of us now. I suspect the answer varies considerably by species and history and where they were standing when the dots went dark. I suspect some of them are recalculating very old decisions. I suspect Sierra is going to write a report that will be read and argued about in rooms I will never see by beings I will never meet. I hope she writes a good one. She asked good questions. She drank the bad coffee without complaint. That counts for something. The tomato plant is still there, still listing, still deciding. I check it every morning. I still try less water, which Cal told me to do and which does not appear to be the solution. I try different soil, different light, different